My husband had always strictly forbidden me from entering the back guest house, but the faint sound of a baby's cry, softly calling my name from there, forced me to break down the locked door. I screamed hysterically. My knees went weak, seeing the horrifying reality that my family had kept so tightly hidden. Before the story begins, write in the comments what state you're all watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can grow and continue to bring you even more compelling stories. The sound of shattering glass echoed deafeningly in the spacious living room. I looked down, staring numbly at the shards of a crystal glass my mother-in-law had just slammed onto the marble floor. The warm tea that had been inside it was now pooling, staining the expensive Persian rug I had bought with my own savings years ago. My chest heaved, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I could only bite my lower lip hard to hold back, the tears welling in my eyes. "You useless woman!" my mother-in-law shrieked, her trembling index finger pointed directly at my face. The veins in her neck bulged, her face red with a rage that, for some reason, had exploded out of nowhere today. "You should be grateful my son even wanted to marry you. Grateful that Ethan was willing to pick up a sick, broken woman like you to be his wife. But what do you give in return? You just sit there, daydreaming, and eating the food in this house. You are a complete parasite." I glanced toward my husband, Ethan, who was sitting casually on the dark brown leather sofa. The man I had been married to for 4 years remained silent. He loosened the expensive silk tie around his neck, a tie I had bought for him last month as a birthday gift, using my private credit card, the limit of which he had never known. Ethan didn't even look at me. He was busy staring at his phone screen, as if his mother's screams, tearing down his wife's dignity, were just ordinary background music. Not a single word of defense came from the man who had once promised my late father he would always protect me. "Mom, please, keep your voice down. The neighbors will hear," Ethan finally said. But it wasn't to defend me. It was purely because he was afraid his reputation as a successful, respected man in this exclusive gated community would be ruined. "Let them all hear!" My mother-in-law shot back, even more ferocious. She strode forward, nearly stepping on the broken glass near my feet. "Let everyone know how unfortunate my son is to have a barren wife like you. 4 years of marriage, and that stomach of yours has never grown again after what happened. You can't give us an heir. If you can't provide a child and are just going to continue being a leech, living off my son's success, you'd better pack your things and get out of this house right now." The ultimatum shot from her mouth, sharp as a blade, stabbing me right in the heart. Living off him? A leech? The words swirled in my head, creating an irony so painful I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. My mother-in-law knew nothing. Ethan had never told her the real truth. They both stood on the marble floors of this house with such arrogance, completely unaware that the deed to this luxurious 2-story mansion was entirely in my name. This house was a wedding gift from my late father. All the expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier hanging above our heads, even the latest model sports car parked in the garage that Ethan always boasted about to his friends. Everything was bought with my inheritance. Even the CEO position that Ethan was so proud of. The one my mother-in-law paraded at every country club event was a position at my family's company. The company I had built with my father since I was in college. I chose to step down from the leadership role and give the position to Ethan because I loved him so much. I wanted to protect his ego as a man, as the head of the family, so he wouldn't feel inferior for having a wife more successful than him. I suppressed my own potential, hid my true wealth, and willingly played the part of the obedient housewife, all for the sake of our marriage. And this was my reward? Insults, accusations, and now, being thrown out of my own home? I clenched my fists at my sides. My patience had reached its breaking point. I opened my mouth, ready to shatter all these lies. I was ready to scream that they were the real parasites. I was ready to kick them out this very second. But before a single word could escape my trembling lips, a faint sound stopped my heart for a beat. The sound was so soft, almost drowned out by my mother-in-law's furious breathing. But my ears caught it clearly. It was the sound of crying, the cry of a small child. and the sound was coming from the back hallway, specifically from the direction of the back guest house that Ethan always kept padlocked. "Mama! Mama!" The cry was a summons, his voice hoarse, as if the child had been crying for hours. I froze. My blood felt like it had stopped flowing. All this time, Ethan had strictly forbidden anyone, especially me, from going near that back hallway. He changed the door lock and installed a large padlock. His reason was that the space was being used as a storage facility for hazardous chemicals for a new company project being tested. He said the air was toxic and could worsen my mental state, which the doctor said was still unstable since I lost my baby 2 years ago. In my foolishness and blind trust in my husband, I always obeyed his prohibition without ever asking further questions. But that sound, that cry, was so real. "Ethan." My voice came out as a ragged whisper. I looked into his eyes, which suddenly widened in panic. "There's a child's voice in the back." Ethan's previously relaxed face instantly turned deathly pale. He roughly shut off his phone screen and stood up, blocking my path as I took a single step toward the hallway. "You're hallucinating again?" Ethan hissed quickly. His voice was forced to sound calm, but his eyes radiated a fear he couldn't hide. "It's just a stray cat on the roof or the neighbor's kid. You're out of your sedatives, aren't you? That's why your craziness is coming back." My mother-in-law snorted cynically. "See? Not only barren, but crazy too. Hurry up and deal with your lunatic wife, Ethan. I'll be so embarrassed if the neighbors hear her screaming nonsense." "Mama, please." The cry came again. This time it was louder, more heart-wrenching. My maternal instinct, which had been buried for 2 years under a mountain of grief, suddenly erupted. I don't know where the strength came from, but I shoved Ethan's body with all my might, sending him staggering backward into a glass table. "Move!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, ignoring my mother-in-law's shocked gasp. I ran down the long, dimly lit hallway. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. At the end of the hall, the thick teakwood door stood defiantly, a large iron padlock securing the secret behind it. The sound of crying was clearly coming from inside. "Stop right there!" Ethan yelled, chasing after me. His footsteps were heavy and panicked. "Don't you dare touch that door!" "I told you, it's a toxic storage room. I don't care!" My eyes quickly scanned the hallway. In a corner near the shoe rack was the gardener's toolbox, left behind that morning. I ran to it, rummaging through its contents with trembling hands until I found a large, heavy iron hammer. Ethan was just about to grab my arm when I swung the hammer with all my strength, smashing it against the iron padlock. Clang! The first blow missed, only denting the padlock slightly. Ethan managed to grip my shoulder, pulling me back roughly. "Are you insane? Let go of that hammer! Let me go!" I shrieked, struggling violently. I swung my elbow back, connecting squarely with Ethan's jaw, and his grip loosened. Without wasting a second, I slammed the hammer again, this time aiming for the wooden door's hinges attached to the frame. Crack! The teak wood splintered. I hit it again with all the strength and desperation I possessed. Crack! Crunch! The top hinge ripped away from the frame. With one hard kick, the thick wooden door was finally forced open, swinging inward and hitting the wall behind it. I stood there panting, letting the hammer fall from my hand with a clang onto the ceramic tile. Cool air from an air conditioner immediately hit my face. There was no smell of toxic chemicals. There were no stacks of dusty boxes. My eyes widened as I took in the scene before me. My knees instantly felt like jelly, losing all their strength, and I collapsed to the floor. My mouth was open, but no sound came out except a choked scream caught in my throat. The room, which had been claimed to be a storage unit, had been transformed into an incredibly luxurious nursery. The walls were decorated with cloud-patterned wallpaper. The floor was covered with a soft foam mat, and expensive toys were scattered everywhere. But it wasn't the luxury that made me feel like my sanity was being ripped away. In the middle of the room, on a large bed, sat a woman in a thin silk nightgown. It was Vanessa. Ethan's distant cousin, who we were told had been working out of town and would occasionally visit to borrow money. But what truly made my world collapse, shatter into a million pieces with nothing left, was the small child being held tightly by Vanessa. A little boy, about 2 years old. The child stopped crying when he saw the door break open. He looked at me with a pair of clear, round eyes. Those eyes, the shape of that nose, the curve of those lips, the toddler's face, was a perfect carbon copy of my late father's. My family's lineage was stamped so clearly on that little angel's face. "Mama," the toddler murmured softly, reaching his small hand out toward me. It was as if the blood tie between us spoke louder than any lie. I screamed hysterically, a long, piercing shriek that tore through the silence of the house, voicing the pain, the betrayal, and the horrifying truth that had finally been exposed before my eyes. My vision blurred with tears that streamed down my face. Unstoppable. My chest felt tight, as if a giant boulder was crushing my lungs. I was still kneeling on the hallway floor, right in front of the door I had just destroyed. My eyes couldn't break away from the toddler, who Vanessa was now hiding behind her back. The boy looked scared, seeing me screaming like a madwoman, but there was an unspoken longing in his innocent gaze as he kept trying to peek at me. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway. His breath was shallow, his face ashen. He looked at Vanessa, then at me, his eyes filled with immense panic. My mother-in-law, who had followed from the living room, suddenly stood motionless behind Ethan. Her mouth hung half open, staring at the scene inside the so-called toxic storage. My brain worked at lightning speed, piecing together fragments of memory from the past that had been scattered and shrouded in a fog of grief. The events of 2 years ago replayed in my mind with crystal clarity, as if they had just happened yesterday. The web of lies, so meticulously and cruelly crafted, was now laid bare, exposing my own foolishness. 2 years ago, I was at the peak of my happiness. I was pregnant with my first child, a baby I had longed for. That day, the rain was pouring down. My heavily pregnant belly was suddenly seized by excruciatingly intense contractions. Long before my due date, I was rushed to a prestigious hospital downtown, the same one where I had all my checkups. I remember the pain tearing through my body in the delivery room. I remember the blinding surgical lights and the steady beep of the heart monitor. The last thing I remember before I lost consciousness was the sound of a baby's piercing cry, its first cry in this world. After that, everything went black. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in a cold, all-white room with an IV tube in the back of my hand. The sharp smell of antiseptic stung my nose. I tried to move, but my entire body felt stiff and numb. Beside my bed, Ethan sat with a swollen face. The man's eyes were red, and he held my hand tightly. When he saw me open my eyes, he immediately started crying. Crocodile tears that for 2 years I believed were the deepest expression of a father's grief. "Honey, you're awake," Ethan whispered then, kissing the back of my hand repeatedly. "Thank God you made it through the critical period. You were in a coma for 3 days." My first question, of course, was the only one that mattered. "Our baby. Where's our son, Ethan?" I asked, my voice hoarse and weak, my eyes searching the room for a bassinet. Ethan was silent for a long time. He hung his head, his shoulders shaking as if he were holding back a painful sob. Then, with a trembling voice, he uttered the words that destroyed my life. "I'm so sorry, honey. I failed to protect you both. Our son, our little boy, he didn't make it. His lungs weren't fully developed. The doctors did everything they could, but he passed away a few hours after he was born." My world instantly crumbled. I screamed and cried uncontrollably, thrashing until the IV needle came out of my hand and blood stained the white sheets. I demanded to see my baby's body. I demanded to hold him, even just for a moment. But Ethan held me in a tight embrace. He said the burial had already taken place because the hospital advised that the body be interred immediately, and my comatose state made it impossible to wait. He gave me a death certificate from the hospital, stamped with an official seal and signed by my obstetrician. I was shattered. Severe depression hit me without mercy. For months, I locked myself in my room, refusing to eat, refusing to speak, only crying while hugging the baby blanket I had prepared long ago. The doctor who had treated me prescribed various sedatives that left me feeling drowsy, disoriented, and unable to focus. Those drugs made me easy to control, shutting down my critical reasoning and logic. It was in that fragile, semi-conscious state, under the influence of the drugs, that the second lie was launched. One night, Ethan came into my room with a stack of documents, his face a mask of panic and frustration. He sat on the edge of the bed, telling me that my father's company was on the brink of a massive bankruptcy. There was an embezzlement issue with the old board of directors and many multi-million-dollar projects had stalled. "Your father's company is ruined, honey," Ethan said then, stroking my hair gently. "Creditors are demanding payment. If we don't act fast, not only will the company be seized, but this house and all our personal assets will be taken too. You're sick. You can't possibly handle all of this." With my foolish innocence and a mental state that had yet to recover, I listened to his every word. "I've spoken to a lawyer," Ethan continued, handing me a pen. "You just need to sign this full power of attorney and a temporary transfer of shares to me. I'll step in as CEO to face the creditors and fix the management. Let me carry this burden. Your only focus now is to get better. Trust me, I'll save your father's legacy." Without reading the dozens of pages in that document, without asking Arthur, my family's trusted lawyer who was out of the country at the time, I signed it. I surrendered complete control of my wealth, my company, and my life to the man I considered my hero and protector. Now, sitting on the cold floor facing this secret room, all those lies peeled away one by one, revealing their rotten, true form. Ethan never saved my company. He robbed it. There was never a crisis or threat of bankruptcy. It was all a vicious scenario he concocted with his cronies to legally seize my assets while I was helpless. And most diabolically of all, my son never died. I looked at the toddler again. My father's features couldn't lie. The death certificate was a fake. The first cry I heard in the delivery room was a cry of life, not farewell. Ethan must have bribed a doctor and hospital staff to fake everything. He took my own flesh and blood, separated a newborn from his comatose mother, and brought him here. And Vanessa, that snake who always smiled sweetly whenever she visited and called me Clara. Honey. No wonder she had suddenly moved out of town for work just a few months before I gave birth. She was hidden here, in the back of my own house, allowed to live in luxury, enjoying my money, and raising my biological child while I was confined to the front of the house under the pretext of mental health. No wonder Ethan always made sure I took my sedatives on time. He wasn't treating me. He was disabling me, ensuring I never had enough awareness to find out what was happening in the guest house. He used postpartum depression as an excuse to silence me from the outside world. Lies, betrayal, a dirty conspiracy. They all conspired to destroy me. Ethan, my own husband. Vanessa, his shameless mistress. Probably that doctor, and who knows who else. I slowly rose from the floor. My tears had stopped flowing. The sadness and devastation that had consumed my heart now evaporated, replaced by something much darker and more dangerous. A boiling rage. So hot, it felt like it could burn this entire house to the ground. I stared straight into Ethan's eyes, which were still frozen in fear. My gaze was no longer that of a fragile, depressed wife. It was the gaze of a mother whose child had been stolen and a rightful owner whose fortune had been plundered. They thought I was weak. They thought I was crazy. They had chosen the wrong person to fight. I would make sure that from this moment on, their lives would turn into the most terrifying hell. I would take back my son, my fortune, and I would destroy them all until there was nothing left. A week before the day I shattered that wooden door and discovered the most horrifying secret of my life, the seeds of suspicion had actually already begun to grow and take root within me. All the lies, so neatly designed by my husband, were starting to show small, fatal cracks. It all started with a trivial item I accidentally found on a cloudy morning. That day, our housekeeper had a family emergency, so I decided to sort my husband's dirty laundry myself. As I reached into the pocket of his expensive work jacket, a designer blazer from Italy he had bought with a credit card in my name, my fingers touched a crumpled piece of paper. At first, I thought it was just a receipt from a fancy restaurant or a gas bill, but when I unfolded the slightly wrinkled paper, my eyes fixated on the printed text. It was a grocery receipt from an upscale supermarket. Listed very clearly were 3 packs of imported toddler-sized diapers, 4 cans of premium-grade growth formula, 2 pairs of children's pajamas, and several educational toys. The total came to several $100s. My heart immediately started racing. My hand trembled holding that thin piece of paper. Why was my husband buying so many baby supplies? For whom? My mind immediately went to the children's charity we often donated to, but usually, his personal assistant handled all the charity purchases, not my husband himself. Moreover, these items were bought at 10 p.m., a time when he claimed he was in an emergency meeting with the board of directors. That very night, my suspicion turned into a reckless urge I could no longer contain. My husband came home late, looking exhausted, and fell into a deep sleep right after his shower. His breathing was soft but regular, a sign he was deep in dreamland. I knew he felt completely safe, assuming I had taken the high-dose sedative he always forced on me every night. He didn't know that for the past few days, I had started flushing those damn pills down the toilet so my mind could be clear again. As quietly as a whisper of wind, I lifted our heavy comforter. I got out of bed, making sure no springs creaked, and tiptoed out of the master bedroom. My destination that night was one place: his private home office at the end of the West Wing. The house was silent and dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the large glass windows in the living room. The night air felt colder than usual, seeping into my bones, but my curiosity was far stronger than my fear. I turned the doorknob to his office with extreme care. It wasn't locked. My husband had an enormous ego. He felt he controlled everything in this house. So he saw no need to lock his office door from a wife he considered nearly insane. Once inside, I immediately turned on the small, dim desk lamp, making sure its light wouldn't be visible from the windows. The room was filled with my husband's signature masculine cologne, mixed with the scent of paper and the leather of his large executive chair. My eyes went straight to the drawers of the sturdy mahogany desk. I tried pulling the handles one by one. The first drawer opened, containing only a stack of empty folders and stationery. The second drawer held some meeting notebooks, but the bottom drawer was locked tight. I held my breath. My gut told me that whatever he was hiding was in that bottom drawer. I started searching for the key in every corner of the room, behind the framed photo of us on his desk, inside the pen holder, under a stack of thick books. Nothing. Then my eyes fell on a medium-sized digital safe, neatly built into the bookshelf in the corner. The safe was jet black, with a slowly blinking numeric display. I walked over to it, staring at the screen, my mind racing. What was the password? I tried to remember everything about my husband, our birthdays, our anniversary. I entered the numbers with a trembling finger. Error! The screen flashed red. I tried my late father's birthday, or the founding date of the company he now controlled. Error! A soft beep sounded, warning me I had only one more attempt before the security alarm would go off and wake the entire house. Cold sweat started to trickle down my temples. I closed my eyes, trying to get inside the mind of that narcissist. My husband was a megalomaniac. He worshipped himself. More than anything in the world, he craved power, wealth, and praise. For him, the most important numbers were not related to me, but to himself. Suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. The date he first won a massive contract and made the cover of a business magazine, an achievement he constantly boasted about to anyone he met. That date was the pinnacle of his success. The day his ego was fully gratified. With a hand that still trembled slightly, I pressed the 6 digits onto the safe screen. There was a soft click, followed by the indicator light turning green. The steel safe door slowly swung open. I let out a long, relieved breath, then immediately knelt and pulled out the contents. There were several stacks of documents inside. I took the first stack. My eyes widened as I read the letterhead. It was a loan agreement, stamped in bright red, from an unofficial lending institution, or more accurately, a notoriously ruthless, high-level loan shark in the city. I read the figures listed there. 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. My husband's total debt amounted to several $1,000,000. I almost let out a choked scream. What was all that money for? I turned to the next page and found a breakdown of the fund transfers. My eyes caught a name I knew very well as the recipient of routine, fantastical sums of money. Vanessa, his distant cousin. The money flowed into Vanessa's account, and from the attached transaction history, it was clear the money was used for transactions on various international online casino sites, purchases of luxury designer goods, and overseas vacations without my knowledge. So, all this time, my husband had been leveraging my company's name to borrow money from loan sharks just to fund the hedonistic lifestyle and gambling habit of his mistress. My hand reached for the second folder at the bottom of the safe. When I opened it, my world felt like it had stopped spinning. It was the deed to my family's company, the same document my husband had handed me when I was half-conscious in a hospital bed 2 years ago. But this time, I could read it with a clear mind. There was no word temporary in it. The document was a complete and total relinquishment of ownership rights, an absolute grant of all majority shares of my company to my husband, with not a single cent of compensation for me. And most shockingly, the signature above the seal, though it looked very much like mine, was clearly a professional forgery. The stroke was different from my usual handwriting. He had forged my signature in front of a paid-off notary who he had undoubtedly bribed. I sank onto the thick, plush carpet in that room. My chest tightened, a wave of nausea overwhelming me as I saw how dirty and cunning the man sleeping in the room next to mine truly was. He wasn't just a liar, he was a criminal. But amidst the devastation and heart-wrenching pain, a sharp realization emerged in my mind. I looked at the stack of loan shark documents again. My husband might look strong and powerful on the outside. He might act like a king in this house. But in reality, he was standing on a ticking time bomb. My husband had one fatal weakness: an extreme phobia of poverty and public humiliation. I remembered an incident a few months ago when we attended a party for one of his business colleagues. He had flown into a blind rage at a waiter who accidentally spilled a little water on his jacket, simply because he felt his pride had been wounded in front of other millionaires. He was terrified of looking poor, of looking like a failure, of looking powerless. He had built a perfect image of a successful executive, but in reality, he was drowning in millions of dollars of debt to loan sharks, with interest compounding every month. This was my weapon. These documents, his dirty debt secret, and the threat from those ruthless loan sharks were the sharpest knife I would use to rip off his mask of arrogance. He had taken everything from me, and I would make sure he felt a fear far greater than just pain. I neatly arranged the documents, took a photo of every page with an old phone I had secretly kept, and returned everything to the safe, placing it exactly as it was. That night, as I lay back down beside him in our bed, I no longer felt like a betrayed wife. I was the judge and executioner, scheduling the date of his demise. The weapon was in my hand. It was just a matter of waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. Back to the present. In the back hallway, right in front of the guest house door I had just destroyed, time seemed to stand still. My gaze was locked on the little boy in Vanessa's arms, my biological son, my own flesh and blood, who for 2 years I believed was dead. Ethan, my husband, looked at me with a face that was a mixture of extreme panic and rage. My mother-in-law stood frozen behind him, her once arrogant face now ashen with shock at what her precious son had been hiding. In a split second, my survival instincts took over. I knew if I fought them physically right now, I would lose. Ethan was physically stronger, and I was in their territory, surrounded by the false narrative that I was a dangerous, mentally disturbed woman. If I tried to take my son now, he could easily call his paid-off psychiatrist and have me committed to a mental institution, claiming I was hallucinating and acting aggressively. I couldn't be reckless. True victory required cold, hard calculation, so I played my best role. I let my eyes widen, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps as if the oxygen in the room had been sucked out. I pointed at the little boy with a violently trembling finger, then looked at my husband with a vacant stare. The baby, I stammered, clutching my own hair with both hands. I let my body convulse for a moment before screaming hysterically, as if my sanity had truly snapped. "My baby is dead! He died at the hospital! That's not my baby! A ghost! You're keeping a ghost!" I threw myself onto the cold marble floor, rolling around while covering my ears tightly and rambling incoherently. I wailed and sobbed, presenting the perfect image of a depressed mother whose sanity had shattered from a severe visual hallucination. "Get her to the bedroom now!" my husband shouted. His voice was filled with a sick relief at seeing me lose my mind. He seemed to have concluded that the sedatives I'd been taking had permanently damaged my memory. "Mom! Grab her legs! Vanessa, close the door! Don't let the boy see this!" Roughly, my husband and mother-in-law dragged my limp body away from the guest house. They hauled me through the living room, struggled up the stairs, and threw me onto the bed in our master bedroom. I continued to rave, calling out for a doctor and begging for the ghostly apparitions to be driven from my mind. My husband wiped the sweat from his forehead and approached me. He gripped my shoulders with such force it felt like my bones would crack. "Calm down. You're just hallucinating because you forgot to take your medication," my husband whispered, his tone artificially gentle, though his eyes radiated panic and palpable disgust. "There's no little boy back there. It's just an empty storage room. Understand? Now, you stay here. Don't come out until I open the door. This is for your own good." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked quickly out of the room. I heard the door slam shut, followed by the sound of a key turning twice in the lock from the outside. Click! Click! I was locked in, a prisoner in my own bedroom. The moment his footsteps faded and I could no longer hear him going down the stairs, my crying stopped instantly. The crocodile tears that had been streaming down my cheeks were wiped away with the back of my hand. My hysterical ramblings vanished without a trace, replaced by a chilling silence. I got up from the bed, straightened my disheveled clothes, and stood tall before the vanity mirror. The reflection showed a woman with messy hair and swollen eyes, but her gaze was as sharp as a dagger poised to strike a heart. The role of the passive victim was officially over. The days of crying over my fate and begging for mercy were finished. From this moment on, I was the architect of their destruction. I walked to the large wardrobe in the corner. Behind a stack of thick blankets on the top shelf, I pulled out a small smartphone I had bought secretly with the help of our housekeeper a year ago, long before she was fired by my husband. This secret phone was never connected to the house's Wi-Fi and used a prepaid number that no one knew about. My first goal was to secure my company and all my assets so my husband couldn't use my own money to fight me in court. I dialed a number I knew by heart. The call connected on the third ring. "Hello," Arthur Vance speaking. The baritone voice of a middle-aged man came from the other end. Arthur was our family lawyer, my late father's most trusted confidant who had handled all our legal affairs since I was a teenager. "Arthur." "It's me," I whispered quickly, pacing near the window for a better signal. "Good heavens, Clara, where have you been? I've been trying to reach your main number for months, but your husband always said you were in intensive care out of town and couldn't be disturbed." Arthur's voice was a mix of shock and relief. "Listen to me very carefully, Arthur. We don't have much time." I cut in, my voice as cold as ice. "My husband has been lying to all of us. The share transfer document he submitted to the notary was a forgery. He forged my signature using a stamp and faked a digital signature. Worse, the baby he said died. My son is alive. He's been holding him captive in the back of this house with his mistress." A long silence followed on the other end. I could hear Arthur's heavy, restrained breathing. "That bastard," Arthur cursed, his voice low and filled with incredible rage. I always felt something was off with his financial reports, but he blocked my access, citing a board restructuring. "What do I do, Clara?" Just give the order. I'll destroy him legally this very second. I need you to freeze all company assets. My instructions were clear and structured. My brain worked rapidly, arranging the pieces on an invisible chessboard. Block all access to the main corporate accounts and my personal accounts that he controls. Gather all copies of the forged documents. Prepare a letter of termination for cause, firing him from the CEO position. But don't send it yet. Hold everything. I want to drop this bomb at the precise moment he feels most powerful. As you wish, Clara. I'll get to work with an independent audit team tonight. What about the kidnapping of your son? Should we call the police now? Arthur asked. Not yet. If we call the police now, he could twist the facts, say the child was an illegal adoption or a relative's kid, and then accuse me of being insane. I need irrefutable physical proof. Contact your connections at the forensic lab. We need an emergency DNA test. After hanging up with Arthur, I immediately dialed another number. This time, the call was to Jess, my best friend from college who worked as an investigative journalist. Jess was the only other person who knew how obsessed my husband was with his public image. Hello? Jess's voice was sleepy. Jess, it's me. Please, don't ask questions. Just listen, I said, quickly. Oh my God, where have you been, you idiot? I was about to file a missing persons report. Your husband said you'd been moved to a sanatorium. Jess shrieked from the other end. I'll explain everything later. Right now, I need your help, I said. The tone of my voice made Jess go silent, realizing the gravity of the situation. You have connections with private detective agencies or forensic teams we can hire discreetly, right? I need them to get into my house tomorrow afternoon, while my husband is at work. They need to get a hair sample from the baby in the guest house and from my husband's brush in the bathroom for a secret DNA test. A DNA test? Wait. Don't tell me the baby who died. Jess couldn't finish her sentence, her journalistic instincts quickly piecing it together. Yes, my son is alive, I answered, my voice trembling slightly with emotion before hardening again. And Jess, I need you to leak the address of the guest house to a dark web forum for high-stakes online gambling. My husband owes millions to loan sharks, under his mistress's name. I want their debt collectors to come to this house and terrorize them every night. Make their lives a living hell. Damn, Clara. You're playing for keeps, I see. Jess let out a low, dangerous laugh. Don't worry. I'll have the best forensic team there tomorrow. And as for the loan sharks, consider your address spread across every major syndicate in the city by morning. What's next? I'm going to gather all my weapons, and when the time is right, I will make them beg me for death. I ended the call, hid the phone back in its place, and sat on the edge of the bed. I hugged myself, staring at the locked door with a faint, deadly smile. The hunt had just begun. They had awakened a monster inside of me, and this monster was starving for justice. Just you wait, my dear husband. The hell you built for me is about to become your own grave. 2 days had passed since the incident with the door. For the last 48 hours, I had played the part of the unhinged, insane wife to perfection. I remained locked in the master bedroom, refusing the food trays slid under the door. Every so often, I would let out a hysterical scream, calling for my baby as if I were hallucinating his ghost. From behind the locked door, I could hear my husband's footsteps pacing with satisfaction. He spoke with his mother in the hallway, his voice dripping with a nauseating, dismissive tone. He assured the old woman that my sanity was completely gone and that he would soon be arranging the paperwork for a psychiatric facility to have me permanently removed from the house. They laughed. A greedy, ugly laugh that echoed in the house I had bought with my own hard-earned money. They thought they had already won. They thought I was dead prey. But inside this dark room, hidden under the thick blankets, my eyes were blazing as I stared at the brightly lit screen of my secret phone. A cold, deadly smile played on my lips. Tonight, the first phase of my counterattack would begin. I wouldn't use physical violence. I would methodically destroy my husband's sanity, shred his sense of security, and let his greatest phobias consume him alive. At exactly 2 a.m., When everyone in the house was lost in their filthy dreams, I opened the smart home control app on my phone. When this house was first built, I was the one who designed its entire security system. I had installed hidden speakers in every corner of the house, including the master bedroom, the family room, and the guest house. My husband never knew about this feature. He was too lazy to learn about technology and considered such things trivial. With nimble fingers, I connected my phone to the central audio system. I opened a sound file I had kept secretly for 2 years. It was a recording of my own voice singing a lullaby, interspersed with the heart-wrenching sound of a baby crying. A recording my journalist friend had sourced for me. I pressed play, set the volume to maximum, and directed the output specifically to my husband's bedroom, my mother-in-law's room, and the guest house where his mistress slept with my son. Instantly, the silence of the night shattered. "Rock-a-bye, baby," on the treetop. "When the wind blows, the cradle will rock." The softly sung melody, echoing from the ceilings, sounded utterly terrifying. It snaked through the air like the whisper of a restless spirit. Then came the sound of a baby's piercing cry, wailing loudly, bouncing off the walls of the vast house. "Mama! Mama! Help me, Mama!" It took only 5 seconds before I heard a panicked scream from the room across the hall. My husband woke with a gasp. I heard something crash to the floor, followed by the sound of his heavy, frantic footsteps. "What is that sound? Hey, who turned on a radio?" my husband yelled, his voice trembling violently. From the downstairs bedroom, my mother-in-law shrieked in terror. "Oh, Lord Jesus. Dear God. A demon. There's a baby ghost in this house. Help!" The old woman ran out of her room, swinging a broom wildly in every direction, sobbing uncontrollably, convinced the spirit of her supposedly dead grandson had come back for revenge. In the guest house, things were just as chaotic. My husband's mistress screamed hysterically, pounding on the connecting door, calling my husband's name. "Ethan, open the door! Open it! There's a crying sound in the walls! I'm scared!" My husband ran back and forth like a man possessed. He tried flipping the main light switches, pressing buttons on the TV, even unplugging cords from the outlets. But the crying and singing wouldn't stop, because the audio system was embedded in the walls and ran on a backup power supply. I sat on my bed, arms crossed in the darkness, and laughed silently. The satisfaction coursing through my veins was intoxicating. I let them suffer for a full 15 minutes before finally turning off the audio with a single tap. The rest of the night was filled with a furious argument between my husband, his mother, and his mistress, each blaming the other for the supernatural terror. The following afternoon, I launched my second attack. The night before was for his mind. Today was for his pride. My lawyer had moved quickly, freezing all assets and credit cards linked to my name or the main corporate accounts. I knew my husband's mistress's daily schedule perfectly. Every Wednesday afternoon, that parasite would go to a luxury shopping mall to squander my husband's money, mingle with her fake socialite circle, and show off her designer goods. At precisely noon, a huge commotion erupted downstairs. I pressed my ear against the locked door. I heard the front door slam violently, followed by the sound of high heels stomping furiously on the marble floor. "Ethan! Get out here! Get out here! Right now!" my husband's mistress shrieked, calling for him. My husband, who was drinking coffee in the living room, sounded confused. "What is wrong with you? Why are you screaming like a crazy person? You come home with no shopping bags, just a foul mood. You're the crazy one. You did this on purpose to humiliate me in front of all my friends, didn't you?" the woman screamed, sobbing with overwhelming emotion. "I was at a designer boutique. I had picked out 2 limited edition crocodile skin bags in front of my entire lunch group. But when I handed them your black card, the cashier declined it. The card was declined, blocked. That damn cashier looked at me with such contempt and said the account was frozen. My friends laughed at me. My reputation is ruined. You said you were a rich CEO, but you can't even pay for a handbag. What do you mean? Blocked." My husband's voice rose, panicked. His phobia of poverty and shame had been brutally triggered. "That's impossible. The limit on that card is unlimited. Give it to me. I'll call the bank right now. I listened to my husband's phone conversation with the bank from behind the door. His tone, initially arrogant and demanding, slowly turned to a trembling, terrified whisper. What do you mean my account is frozen on the order of the primary holder? I'm her husband. I'm the CEO. Hello? Hello? Damn it! My husband slammed his phone on the floor, cracking the screen. What is going on? His mistress demanded, her voice filled with suspicion. I don't know. The bank said all the security credentials were changed centrally. My husband sounded completely frustrated, his breathing heavy. None of the cards are working. And the cash I had in the safe, I already used to pay the interest on the loan last month. Hearing the word loan, my third attack for the day arrived right on cue. My friend had done her job brilliantly. Just as the sun set and the sky darkened, a black van and a dozen roaring motorcycles screeched to a halt in front of the main gate of our luxury home. From my second-floor window, I peeked through the curtains and looked down. About 20 large, tattooed men carrying iron bars got out of their vehicles. They were the debt collectors from the loan shark syndicate that had lent my husband millions to finance his mistress's lifestyle. The address, which my husband had guarded so secretively, was now public knowledge. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of iron bars striking the iron gate echoed down the residential street. Curious neighbors began to emerge from their homes, standing on their lawns, to watch this shameful spectacle with judgmental eyes. Hey, you phony CEO! Get out here! One of the largest men yelled, his hoarse voice booming. Where's our boss's money? Pay your debt, you bastard! You took millions to fund your mistress's gambling, and now you're hiding in this mansion. Downstairs, the atmosphere turned into a living hell. My husband frantically shouted at the house security to double-lock the gate, but the thugs kept pounding and throwing rocks at the first-floor windows. Crash! The sound of shattering glass was followed by my mother-in-law's terrified screams. What debt is this? Who are those violent men outside? My mother-in-law cried hysterically, clutching my husband's arm. You said you were successful. You said you were rich. Why are thugs collecting a debt at our house? Shut up, Mom. Stop asking questions. My husband snapped harshly. His respect for his mother evaporated instantly, replaced by overwhelming panic. His phobia of shame exploded. He was terrified of being seen as poor and flawed in the public eye. Now, all the neighbors in the elite community he had always tried to impress were watching his downfall. His reputation was shattering in a single night. You owe millions to loan sharks? His mistress screamed from the guest house. You told me that money was purely from your company's profits. If they touch any of my things, I will kill you. I leaned against the window frame, watching the chaos unfold below with a heart of ice. There wasn't a single shred of pity in my chest. They were reaping the storm they had sown. This psychological assault had successfully dismantled their sanity and sense of security. My husband was now cornered like a frightened rat, and tomorrow morning, when he had no way out, I would deliver the fatal blow that would end it all. Morning broke with an air that felt heavy and suffocating inside the house. The remnants of last night's chaos were still evident. The broken glass in the living room window hadn't been cleaned, and the stench of fear seemed to cling to every wall. The debt collectors had only left before dawn, after threatening to burn down the guest house if their money wasn't paid in full within 48 hours. I sat calmly on the edge of my bed, slowly brushing my hair. I had showered, put on a neat house dress, and my face no longer showed any despair. My eyes were clear and sharp. I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. My bedroom door creaked open. My husband entered, his steps heavy and uncertain. He looked dreadful, a far cry from his usual elegant self. He had dark bags under his eyes, his normally perfectly coiffed hair was a mess, and his shirt was wrinkled. He looked like a walking corpse. His hands trembled as he placed a tray with breakfast and a cup of tea, which I was certain was laced with a high dose of sedatives, on the nightstand. In his other hand, he held a brown leather folder. Good morning, honey, my husband said, his voice forced to sound gentle and loving, but his smile was stiff. and his eyes couldn't hide his deep desperation. He was cornered, in urgent need of cash, and I was his only way out. I didn't answer. I just stared at him directly, letting the silence intimidate him. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of me. "You look much better today. I think your hallucinations and panic attacks have subsided. Honey, I've been thinking all night. Your condition isn't going to improve in this house. The atmosphere here isn't good for you. I found a premium mental wellness facility overseas. You can rest there, away from all disturbances, and be treated by the best doctors." He slid the brown folder toward me, then took a gold pen from his shirt pocket. "You just need to sign this document. It's a guardianship consent form, so I can handle all your administrative affairs there. And because the costs are very high, I've also included a clause for the sale of this house and the liquidation of your emergency funds to cover your medical expenses. This is all for your own good. You trust me, right?" I looked down at the papers he presented. It wasn't a guardianship consent form. It was a forged deed of sale for the house and a power of attorney to liquidate all my remaining bank deposits. He intended to sell my father's house to pay off his gambling debts to the loan sharks and dump me in some godforsaken mental institution so his secrets would be safe forever. Devious. A true devil in human form. Slowly, I lifted my face. A small smile, as cold as Arctic ice, spread across my lips. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" My voice came out crystal clear, calm, and sharp. There was no more trembling, no more hint of insanity. My husband froze, his eyes blinking several times, shocked by the drastic change in my tone. "What? What do you mean, honey? Don't start hallucinating again. Just sign this." Instead of taking his pen, I took the forged documents. With a slow, deliberate motion, I tore the thick papers in half, then tore them again and again until they were tiny scraps. I threw the pieces of paper right in his face. The fragments fell like dirty snow onto his lap. "You think I'm crazy?" I hissed, leaning toward him. My gaze locked onto his, which were now wide with horror. "You think those damn sedatives you've been mixing into my drinks for 2 years managed to kill my brain? You are dead wrong. You're lucid, but yesterday, you were screaming." "Of course I was screaming yesterday." I cut him off sharply. I stood up from the bed, towering over him as he remained frozen in his chair. "I had to pretend to lose my mind so you'd feel safe leaving me alone in this room. So you wouldn't suspect that I was busy weaving the rope for your gallows." I walked to the wardrobe, reached into the bottom of a pile of old clothes, and pulled out a thick white envelope that my lawyer had delivered at dawn. Using a folding ladder to reach my window, I walked back to my husband and slammed the envelope on the table in front of him with a loud thud that made him jump. Thwack! "Open it!" I commanded, my voice echoing in the silent room with an authority that could not be defied. The voice of a sole owner, not a dependent wife. My husband's hands trembled violently as he broke the envelope's seal. He pulled out several sheets of paper. "That is my first weapon to destroy you," I said coldly, pointing to the first page he held. My husband's eyes scanned the paper, and his face instantly turned as white as a sheet. "It's a DNA test result from a private forensic lab. With an official red seal. 99.99% match," I said, reciting the number printed there. "Your baby's hair, the one you've kept locked in the guest house, and a hair from my brush. He is my son. The son you declared dead, complete with a forged death certificate from your paid-off hospital. You kidnapped my own flesh and blood, separated him from his mother, and gave him to that gambling-addicted mistress of yours. This isn't real. Where did you get this? It's fake." My husband threw the paper down, his breathing ragged, his chest heaving. He tried to deny it, but the terror in his eyes told the absolute truth. I laughed cynically. "Go ahead and deny it in front of a judge. My friend brought a forensic team into this house yesterday afternoon while you were busy begging the bank that blocked your cards." I gave him no chance to breathe. I pulled the second paper from the stack and shoved it in his face. "This is my second weapon. Read it carefully. It was the independent financial audit of my company, placed side by side with the copies of the loan agreements with the loan sharks that I had photographed from his safe. The company was never bankrupt 2 years ago. You are the one bankrupting it now, I hissed, filled with rage. You forged my signature on the share grant deed. You manipulated financial reports and used my company's name to borrow millions from loan sharks to fund your mistress's lifestyle. The money that should have been my son's inheritance, you burned at a casino table. I can explain. My husband's voice was a squeak. The arrogance and conceit he had worn as a mask for years now crumbled to dust. The narcissistic man who had always worshipped himself was now reduced to the most pathetic creature I had ever seen. He fell to his knees on the marble floor, trying to grab the hem of my dress, but I stepped back in disgust. There's nothing to explain. I cut him off. I threw the last paper, the one with my husband picked up the paper with a trembling hand. He read the contents, and instantly, he broke down crying. It was the decision from the emergency shareholders meeting led by my lawyer. Termination for cause, I said, savoring every second of his destruction. As of this moment, you are no longer CEO. You have no position. You have no company. You have no access to a single cent of my money. Your credit cards are dead. Your bank accounts are frozen. And the men who were banging on your gate last night will be back tonight to collect the millions you will never be able to repay in your lifetime. Please, I'm begging you, honey, my husband wailed, crawling to hug my legs. Forgive me. I was weak. I was blinded by greed. Don't do this to me. Those loan sharks will kill me. Please, pay off my debt. You're so rich. You can save me. For the sake of our marriage. Marriage? I kicked his body, sending him rolling backward. The rage I had suppressed for so long erupted like a volcano. You traded our marriage the moment you faked our son's death. You've been dead to me since that day. Suddenly, the bedroom door flew open. My mother-in-law entered with a confused look, holding a small grocery basket. Ethan, what is this? Why are you crying on the floor? The old woman exclaimed, running to her son. She glared at me. You crazy witch! What have you done to my successful son? I'm short on grocery money. Tell this parasite of a wife to get me some cash. Shut your old mouth. I roared, my voice thundering, stopping her rant. I looked at the old woman who had insulted me for years with eyes full of hatred. Your successful son is nothing but a white-collar thief. He has nothing. This house is mine. The company is mine. The car you show off to your country club friends was bought with my money. And your son now owes millions to the thugs who smashed our windows last night. My mother-in-law froze. The grocery basket fell from her hands. She looked at her son, now curled up and crying on the floor, then at me, slowly realizing that all her false pride had been nothing but dust in the wind. I walked past both of them, opening my bedroom door wide. The air of freedom washed over my face. Your time in this house is over. Tomorrow, I will take this nightmare to the next level. I looked at them with the smile of a conqueror. You think you've seen the worst of it? Trust me. The real judgment has just begun. That evening, the sky was overcast, as if the universe itself was preparing to witness a long-awaited spectacle of justice. Although my husband had been utterly destroyed before me that morning, my mother-in-law apparently possessed a level of arrogance and foolishness that was beyond saving. Unaware that her precious son had just lost an entire corporation and was being hunted by hired killers disguised as debt collectors, the old woman stubbornly proceeded with her vile plan. She had sent out invitations 2 days prior. From my second-floor window, I saw luxury cars begin to line the street in front of my house. My mother-in-law had invited the head of the homeowners association, local community leaders, the socialite women from our exclusive neighborhood, and all the relatives from my husband's side of the family. She had even hired an expensive catering service, undoubtedly with the remaining limit on a credit card she didn't yet know I had blocked, to serve a lavish spread in the backyard. A large white tent had been erected. Chairs draped in satin were neatly arranged, facing a small stage equipped with a projector screen. Her purpose for this event was heinous. She planned to use the guise of a community wellness gathering as a stage to announce to the world that I had permanently lost my sanity. She wanted to build a public narrative that I was a dangerous, crazy wife, giving her son a perfectly legitimate reason in the eyes of society and the law to ship me off to a mental institution and sell the house. She wanted to clear her family's name before discarding me like trash. I stood before the large mirror in my room. The worn-out nightgown that had clothed me for the past 2 years was now in the trash. Tonight, I would not appear as a victim. I opened my old wardrobe and pulled out an elegant, sharply tailored women's power suit in a commanding navy blue. I carefully applied my makeup, concealing the dark circles under my eyes, and painted my lips with a dark red lipstick that conveyed courage and authority. I styled my hair in a neat, professional updo. When I looked at my reflection, I no longer saw the depressed woman who mourned her baby's fake death. I saw a rightful owner, a CEO, and a mother ready to tear the throat out of anyone who dared to harm her child. At exactly 8 p.m., the event began. The clinking of silverware and the buzz of conversation drifted up to my room. Through a crack in the door I had deliberately left ajar, I heard the footsteps of my friend, who had snuck in through a side entrance, carrying a black laptop bag. She gave me a thumbs up from the top of the stairs, signaling that she had successfully hacked into the projector system in the backyard and was awaiting my cue. I stepped out of my room, walking down the second-floor hallway. I could hear my mother-in-law's voice echoing through the speakers. She was standing on the small stage, holding a microphone with a hand adorned with thick gold bracelets. Gold bought with my inheritance. Ladies, gentlemen, and all our dear family and friends. My mother-in-law's voice trembled, faked to sound like she was holding back deep sorrow. Thank you for coming tonight. It truly breaks my heart to air our family's private matters, but we have no other choice. My daughter-in-law, the wife of my beloved son, has completely lost her sanity since losing her baby 2 years ago. Lately, she has been having violent outbursts, destroying things, and hallucinating ghosts in this house. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the guests. A few of the socialite women whispered to each other, shaking their heads. My son has tried to be an incredibly patient husband, my mother-in-law continued, dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue. He has worked day and night running the company while caring for his sick wife, but for the safety of us all, and for my daughter-in-law's own good, our family has decided to send her to an intensive mental health facility tomorrow morning. We ask for your prayers that the process goes smoothly. My husband sat in the front row. He didn't dare look at the stage. His face was ashen. His body trembled, and his shirt was soaked with cold sweat. He knew what was coming, but his fear of the loan sharks and his own shame had paralyzed him. Next to him sat his mistress, holding my biological son on her lap. The boy wore a knit cap to obscure his face from the guests. That snake of a woman occasionally stroked my husband's back, pretending to be a supportive relative. My rage peaked, seeing my son in that woman's lap. It was time to end this cheap circus. I descended the marble staircase, my steps slow, steady, and punctuated by the sharp click of my high heels. Click, clack. The sound of my footsteps cut through the silence that followed my mother-in-law's fraudulent speech. One by one, the guests' heads turned toward the source of the sound. Their murmuring stopped instantly. Their mouths fell slightly ajar. They had expected to see a crazed woman with disheveled hair and dirty clothes being dragged away by nurses. Instead, they saw a powerful, impeccably dressed businesswoman looking at them with eyes that were sharp and sane. My mother-in-law froze on the stage. The tissue fell from her hand. Her mouth hung open at the sight of me. Why are you out of your room? Go back! Get back to your room right now!" she shrieked, forgetting to turn off the microphone, so her shrill voice blasted through the garden. I ignored her. I walked through the crowd of guests, who automatically parted to make way for me. My gaze was locked on my husband, who was now slumped in his chair as if he wanted to melt into the ground. His mistress clutched my son tighter, her face paling at my approach. I ascended the 3 steps to the small stage and stood directly in front of my mother-in-law. Without a word, I snatched the microphone from her trembling hand with a single, rough jerk. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." My voice was calm, clear, and full of authority. No wavering, no hysteria, just absolute command. "Please forgive this little interruption. My mother-in-law here has always had a flair for the dramatic. She says I'm crazy. She says I hallucinate. Tonight, let's see who is truly insane and who has been living in a filthy illusion of lies." I turned toward the corner of the garden where my friend stood behind the operator's table. I gave her a single nod. Instantly, the large projector screen behind me, which had been displaying a prayerful graphic, went black. The next moment, a giant document appeared on it. It was the DNA test result, bearing the logo of a renowned forensic lab and a very clear red seal. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the first truth," I said, pointing to the screen. 2 years ago, my husband declared that the baby I gave birth to had died. He buried an empty coffin and gave me a fake death certificate. Why? Because he kidnapped my biological son from the hospital, brought him to this house, hid him in the guest house, and let his mistress raise my own flesh and blood. The atmosphere in the garden exploded. There were gasps of shock from the women. The men stood up from their chairs, their faces filled with disbelief. All eyes immediately turned to my husband's mistress, who was now trembling with fear, clutching the toddler. "That's a lie! She's slandering my son! She's crazy!" my mother-in-law shrieked, trying to grab the microphone back. But I shoved her shoulder hard, and she stumbled and fell to the stage floor. "Slander?" I let out a cold laugh. The projector screen changed. Now it displayed screenshots of bank statements, proof of transfers to online gambling sites, and the loan agreement with the loan sharks. The second truth. My voice grew louder, drowning out the murmurs of the guests. My husband, whom you've all known as a successful CEO, is actually a thief and a gambler. He forged my signature to seize my father's company. And do you know where the company's money went? He borrowed millions of dollars from loan sharks to finance the lavish lifestyle and gambling addiction of his mistress. The man you call successful is a criminal being hunted by thugs. "Stop it! Please, stop!" my husband suddenly screamed from his seat. He threw himself to his knees on the grass, sobbing and wailing in front of the hundreds of pairs of eyes that now stared at him with utter disgust and contempt. His greatest phobia had become a reality. His pride was being stripped bare in front of the public he had always worshipped. The projector screen changed again. This time, it showed video from a hidden security camera, recording my husband and his mistress plotting the illegal sale of this house and the plan to commit me to a mental institution. The evidence was undeniable. Their recorded voices echoed clearly, demolishing any possible defense. At that exact moment, the sound of police sirens wailed loudly from outside the gate. The flashing red and blue lights swept across the house walls. A few seconds later, a dozen uniformed police officers entered the garden, led by my lawyer, who walked with a grim, determined expression. "Good evening. We're with the police," an officer announced. He walked straight toward my husband, who was still prostrate on the grass. "Ethan Miller, you are under arrest for state document forgery, kidnapping of a minor, corporate embezzlement, and attempted medically induced murder. You have the right to remain silent." An officer swiftly handcuffed my husband's hands behind his back. The man offered no resistance. He just sobbed, snot and tears mixing on his pathetic face. 2 female officers also approached his mistress. The woman tried to fight back, screaming and cursing as the police separated my son from her arms. I stepped down from the stage and ran toward my son. As the officer held him, my terrified child turned toward me. He stretched out his tiny arms, tears streaming down his face, and called out in his toddler voice, "Mama! Mama!" I took him into my arms. I held his small body tightly, burying my face in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of him that had been stolen from me for so long. Tears of joy and relief poured out, soaking his shoulder. "Mama's here, sweetie. Mama will never let you go again. You're safe now," I whispered over and over. Amidst the chaos, as my husband and his mistress were dragged toward the police cars, followed by the jeers and disgusted glares of the neighbors, my mother-in-law crawled off the stage. She approached me, her face streaked with tears. Her hand tried to grab the hem of my suit jacket. "My dear daughter-in-law, please, please don't send my son to prison. I'm begging you. Forgive him. I'm your mother-in-law." "You can't do this to us," she whimpered, her pleading voice sounding utterly revolting. I took a step back, looking down at her. The embers of my rage still burned in my eyes. "Forgiveness is not available for the devils who applauded my suffering," I said coldly. I called over several of the community security guards who had been standing by the gate. "This house is my property. I want this old woman removed from my property tonight. Do not allow her to take anything but the clothes on her back. Remove the necklace, bracelets, and rings she's wearing. They were all bought with money embezzled from my company." "What? You can't throw me out on the street. I'm an old woman. It's cold tonight," my mother-in-law shrieked, struggling as two guards took hold of her arms. Forcibly, they stripped off all the gold jewelry she had always flaunted in front of her friends. "You once called me a parasite, didn't you?" I asked cynically, leaning close to her face. "Now you'll know what it feels like to be a parasite that has lost its host. The exit is that way. Pray your son's loan sharks don't find you sleeping on the side of the road tonight." My mother-in-law's screams echoed through the night, but not a single guest tried to help her. They all spat on the ground, looking at the old woman with profound disgust. She was dragged out through the tall iron gates, thrown onto the cold, dark sidewalk. The gates were slammed shut and locked. I stood in the middle of the garden, holding my son, who had now fallen asleep on my chest, exhausted from crying. The night wind blew across my face, carrying away all the suffering, pain, and lies that had shrouded this house for so long. The overcast sky above began to drizzle, as if washing away the sins that had once festered in this place. Justice had been served. This public judgment was the most fitting punishment for their arrogance. That night, I didn't cry anymore. I smiled, a smile of absolute freedom. 3 years have passed since that night of judgment, a night that sent shockwaves through the entire city. Time has flown like an arrow that never looks back. The grief, the pain, and the tears that once drowned me in that big house now feel like the remnants of a nightmare from another life. One that ended long ago. I stood before the panoramic glass window that stretched from floor to ceiling in my 25th floor office. The bright morning sun of the city streamed in, warming my back. I sipped my strong black coffee from a porcelain cup, savoring the bitter taste that ignited my spirit. Behind me, the large teak desk was piled high with documents for new projects, international partnership proposals, and financial reports showing a sharply rising profit curve. Since I reclaimed the CEO's chair, my father's company has not only recovered from the brink of bankruptcy caused by my ex-husband's theft, but has also grown rapidly into one of the industry giants in the country. I work with an iron fist cloaked in elegance. There is no more naive foolishness for anyone to exploit. My lawyer, who now serves as the head of our internal legal department, ensures that there isn't a single loophole for any parasite to penetrate. "Excuse me, Madam CEO." A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. My best friend, whom I had promoted to head of public relations for her brilliance in handling the media, peeked through the door. She smiled broadly. "The meeting with the investors from Japan is over. You're free for the day. Don't forget your promise to our little prince." I put down my coffee cup and smiled genuinely. Of course, I could never forget my pickup duty. I straightened my suit, grabbed my handbag from the sofa, and walked out of my office building feeling light. My private driver was already waiting in the lobby. We cut through the city traffic toward a prestigious international kindergarten located in a lush, green neighborhood. As soon as the car stopped in front of the school gate, the final bell rang. Shortly after, from behind the glass doors, a 5-year-old boy came running out at full speed with a rocket-themed backpack on his shoulders. His face was beaming. His eyes sparkled with intelligence, and his laughter echoed through the afternoon air. "Mommy! Mommy!" he shouted joyfully. He leaped into my arms, nearly knocking me over with his surprising strength. I caught him, spun him around in the air, and planted a flurry of kisses on his chubby cheeks. "Hello, my little champion. How was school today? Did you make a nice painting?" I asked, ruffling his thick black hair. "It was great. I painted a giant rocket. Mommy, can we put it on the fridge later?" He chattered happily. There was no trace of fear or childhood trauma left on his face. He had grown into a loving, confident, and incredibly bright child. He was the center of my universe, the reason for every breath I took and every battle I won. After buying him his favorite chocolate ice cream from a shop near the school, we sat on a park bench, enjoying the afternoon. While my son was busy devouring his ice cream, getting it all over his mouth, my phone vibrated. A message from my lawyer. It was the annual report on the legal status of the people who had once destroyed my life. Though I had mostly purged them from my thoughts, monitoring their suffering was a small routine that ensured justice continued its course. I opened the PDF attached to the message. My eyes scanned the formally written report. My ex-husband was sentenced to 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge showed him absolutely no mercy for his long list of serious crimes, from document forgery and child kidnapping to multi-million-dollar embezzlement. However, the state's prison sentence was merely the beginning of his real hell. The report stated that the loan sharks who lost their millions never let him go. Since my ex-husband was bankrupt and couldn't pay a cent, the sharks used their network inside the correctional system. They paid off inmates in the maximum security block to torture him daily. My ex-husband, the megalomaniac who once worshipped his own good looks and appearance, had now lost half his teeth. His nose was permanently broken, his body was covered in cigarette burns, and he was forced to be the personal toilet cleaner for other inmates. He lived in a state of perpetual fear, waking up every night from the trauma of being beaten, begging for a death that never came. He was paying the price for his darkest phobia. He had become the most despised, impoverished trash in the most isolated place on earth. I scrolled to the next page. The fate of his mistress was not much different. On the night of her arrest, she tried to wriggle out of it, blaming everything on my ex-husband. She claimed to know nothing about the forgery or the kidnapping, stating she was just hired as a nanny. Of course, the trail of money transfers and the video recordings I had destroyed, her alibi to pieces. She was sentenced to 15 years in a women's correctional facility. The beauty she had used to seduce other women's husbands faded without a trace. She was assigned to the prison laundry, washing piles of foul-smelling clothes by hand until her skin was raw and calloused. No more designer goods. No more luxury vacations. Her family back home disowned her. Refusing to acknowledge her after the shame of her affair and kidnapping case went viral in the national media. She was rotting alone in her belated regret. Then, on the final page, was a small investigative report on my mother-in-law. After I threw her out that night without a penny to her name, the old woman tried to seek help from the relatives who attended the gathering. Of course, after witnessing her son's crimes and knowing the family was no longer wealthy, not a single relative was willing to take her in. They slammed their doors in her face, treating her like a carrier of family shame. Out of her remaining pride and arrogance, she refused to go to a government-run shelter for the elderly. Not wanting to associate with poor people, that foolish decision led her to a harsh life on the streets. Now, the woman who once loved to wear thick gold bracelets and look down on others spent her days pushing a rickety shopping cart, collecting cardboard and plastic bottles around a local market. She slept on old newspapers under a damp, foul-smelling overpass. The report mentioned that on several occasions, my company's security guards had caught the old woman standing across the street from my office building. She would just stand there, crying, looking up at my 25th floor office window, perhaps regretting her foolishness in casting out the daughter-in-law who could have given her the life of a queen. But before she could ever get close to the lobby, the guards would always shoo her away like a stray dog. I closed the document and locked my phone screen. There was no triumphant, explosive smile, only a deep, profound peace. Karma never misses its address. It collects its debts with perfect accuracy, returning every tear and every ounce of suffering to its creators, multiplied. Mommy, my ice cream is all gone. My son's voice broke my reverie. He held up the empty paper cup to me with a wide grin, showing his row of white teeth. I chuckled softly, took a napkin, and gently wiped the chocolate from around his mouth and nose. Good job, sweetie. All right, let's go home now. Mommy's going to make your favorite dinner. Yay! Fried sausages. He cheered, hopping off the bench. He took my hand, gripping it tightly with his small fingers, yet it felt so strong, clutching my heart. We walked side by side, toward the car waiting at the curb. The evening breeze gently blew through my son's hair. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. On this path, walking away from a dark past, I realized the most precious thing. They had tried to destroy me, to lock me away, to rob me of my sanity. They thought I was weak prey, but they forgot that when you try to bury a mother and steal her child, you aren't planting a seed of despair. You're sowing the seeds of a hurricane. And when that hurricane grows, it doesn't just blow the roof off your house. It flattens your entire world. I stepped into the car, hugged my son one more time, and looked ahead. The past was burned to ashes. Now, there was only a bright future, belonging to me and my son, a new life built on a foundation of true strength that could never be broken by anyone again.